Hey, welcome back to The Urban Monk. Dr. Pedram here today with Dr. Norman Rosenthal, who's a psychiatrist at Georgetown University, and he is doing some very interesting work with Transcendental Meditation. He himself is a meditator, and then he turned it around and started looking at what meditation, specifically the TM meditation that he teaches, does for people. And there's a missing ingredient that we're going to talk about in here, and it's consciousness. It's something that I've been jumping up and down about, and now there's a serious hardcore scientist who's doing this work. I'm very excited about the work he's doing. Enjoy the show. So can you explain to me what you mean by supermind? It's such a great title, and the implications are a lot, right? It's a fascinating title. I just want to know what your definition of it would be.
Well, what I mean by supermind is that it's the mind in its full capacity. So you are performing, you're creating, you're acting in the best way that you're capable of with your faculties. But it's not just a performance issue, it's also an experience issue. As has been said, we're human beings, we're not human doings. So we do, and it's important that we do effectively and that we are effective in everything we want to do. But it's also important that we live fully and feel like we're living life in a rich and complete way. And that's what happens with a supermind. But the kind of interesting part is that you don't get from 0 to 60, that it's an incremental developmental process that involves an expansion of consciousness. How the consciousness that begins to infuse your daily life keeps growing. And as it keeps growing, the benefits actually accrue automatically. So, most quotes, self-help books say, this is how you become rich, this is how you become famous, this is how you become successful. And it gives you concrete milestones and steps that you have to accomplish. This is saying, this is how your consciousness grows. This is what can happen as it grows. And then, of course, you do all the right things, but you do them more easily and more naturally because you feel like you're changing organically and authentically.
Love that. So, there's a destination and then there's a journey. And, being a TM meditator, I love this. I'm so happy to have you on the show. The way meditation has been taught in the West, I think a lot of times has been kind of polluted by this kind of Zen, Satori, like bang, you got it, now you're in some sort of mystical consciousness and you've arrived type of mentality. And the work in progress concept, the theory of life being a work in progress, let alone your meditation, everything else, I think was kind of lost in the fray. And that journey is really where that juicy stuff is what I'm hearing.
Oh, I couldn't have really put it better myself. As you say that, I really relate to it so completely. I sort of feel a kind of warm glow inside because that journey is what life is all about. And the term cosmic consciousness had been developed as the ultimate goal of the journey, where you are like aware and in the zone, as it were, 24/7. But that turns out to be so unusual. But what is much more common is this growth of consciousness, where you're somewhere along the way, just as we all are in life itself. And my thought was not to have that seem like little foothills with the Himalayas in the distance, which are the real goal, but the thing itself. And that's why when I think of supermind, what I mean by that term is the full growth of this consciousness just from the very beginning, which in itself can be surprisingly potent, all the way up till the most evolved, enlightened individual. And don't ask me how that's measured.
Totally. I thought that was with Facebook fans or something, right? So, there's a couple metaphors that come to mind. One is, you go hiking, it's not about like bagging a peak, but it's the joy of hiking, or the joy of gardening versus, the harvest. And everyone's so focused on the harvest that they forget that the gardening is really the juicy stuff in there. Scientifically, What are you seeing with these kind of expanded states of consciousness? Are you doing EEG studies? Like what are you seeing that's showing you that this consciousness is changing and you actually have kind of a different data set that you're looking at now?
Well, there actually are a few studies using brain waves, EEG patterns that do correlate with people who have daytime transcendent experiences. In other words, the transcendent experiences that normally occur just when people are meditating move into their daily lives. And what is visible is there's a concept called coherence. It's actually an entity, brain coherence. And what that means is different regions of the brain are exhibiting frequencies at the same time, the same frequency at the same time. And what that suggests is that they're collaborating in a more efficient way. That increases in when you expand your consciousness, not just during your meditation sessions, but even with your eyes open as you're doing active tasks. But perhaps to me, the most dramatic example is that in a very extreme form of expanded consciousness, people say that they've got a kind of an awareness during sleep. And this is a wild concept. It's called witnessing. I've certainly never experienced it, but many people report it after some years. And they say that while they're deeply sleeping, they're somehow aware at the same time. It's not like insomnia. It's not like they're waking up. It's like these two states coexist. And when you look at the EEGs in these people, you see the slow delta waves of sleep, and superimposed on those are the meditative alpha waves. So you see these two waveforms coincide just as they're describing their consciousness, their meditative consciousness coinciding with sleep. That's the most powerful demonstration, but it's actually difficult to do because it's something that only evolves over time.
Yeah, I mean, you think of maybe lucid dreamers, you think of, kind of Dolly and Einstein and these guys trying to really kind of game that system a little bit and get their creativity right when they're hitting that delta. But what we're talking about here is being able to actually train into a state of awareness that allows for that to be, right? I mean, so
exactly.
When you're talking about transcendental meditation, first of all, I think I should probably we should set the stage here. TM, brought over by Maharishi, popularized by the Beatles. Can you give us a little bit about what transcendental meditation is for an audience that may or may not have heard of it?
Yes, well, I should say that there are many forms of meditation. So when people say they meditate, it's equivalent to them saying, oh, you exercise? Well, I exercise too. You could be exercising on a treadmill. I could be jogging around the block. Somebody else could be swimming. Each of these exercises involves different muscles, develops different skills, and it's the same as saying, I meditate, oh, you meditate, I meditate too. You might be doing mindfulness, which is a process where people are encouraged to focus on things moment by moment and experience that in a very conscious way, versus TM, which is not that process at all. It's sitting down, closing your eyes, and thinking a mantra, which has been given to you by your teacher. You've been taught how to access it in an automatic way, and that sort of takes you into a different state of consciousness. Mindfulness does not claim to shift consciousness, expand consciousness. That's not its goal. Its goal is to be in the moment in a conscious state. TM, growth of consciousness, moves into the day slowly. It's a very, very different kind of discipline. And so when we talk about meditation, it's often useful to say what type.
I just want to pause quickly and give you some props because I have to say, I've been in this world a long time. I became a Taoist monk when I was like 1997, and I've seen a lot of things come and go. And this is on the show. It's not like we paused the show. I want our audience to hear this. I think that there's a lot in this mindfulness meditation that's coming up and is extremely relevant and is extremely helpful, but they've swept it into kind of the mainstream. And we've lost the baby with the bathwater because where the hell is consciousness? And a lot of these practices were about the cultivation of consciousness and these expanded states which then create this supermind of which you're speaking. But this is the juicy stuff that I think has been missing, and so I want to thank you for kind of bringing consciousness back to the center of a conversation around meditation too.
Well, I really appreciate that. And that's what occurred to me, because the reason I got to write Supermind was that I found my consciousness growing and expanding. And I've recommended TM to several patients, and their consciousness would grow and expand. And oftentimes when I'm talking with somebody who gets it, in other words, they're on that journey too, there's kind of an immediate understanding. Yes, I know what this means. I know when this calm feeling of, it's hard. How do you describe a color? How do you describe a fragrance? These are entities that are not easily put into words. But somehow when, let's say, two people are watching a sunset and somebody says, wow, that's an incredible sunset. Look at those yellows and reds. And the other person is seeing it as well. There's that kind of harmony between those two people. But let's say somebody couldn't see. They wouldn't actually be able to access that. And what I'm trying to do in this book is to bring people in, maybe who haven't had that, and say, listen, this is really possible. This can happen. It's happened to me. I was a skeptic. I didn't expect it. And that's why it was so compelling, because it was so surprising, so unexpected.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so with people who are also practitioners, you share a commonality of experience, right? And this commonality of experience allows you to basically nod and be like, yeah, whatever that is, I get it, right? And we've been there. So then the crossover, so you're a medical doctor, right? And you've been on the research side of all this. So how are we quantifying this for the people who are like, well, I don't see it, I don't get it, I don't know what you're talking about. Are we able to measure it on devices? Is there fMRI? Is there quantitative EEG? Like, how is this coming to the forefront?
Well, I give you an analogy to a piece of research that I did many years ago, which was to identify and describe seasonal affective disorder, or winter depression. And when that entity first emerged, it turned out that there really are millions of people who have trouble with the winter, and they hadn't been characterized at all. The entity hadn't been recognized at all. And it became obvious that this was widespread, this was important, this was telling you something fundamental about how we respond to our environment and how our biology and psychology changes with the seasons. And immediately I went about characterizing it and saying, who are these people? How old are they? Are they mostly women? When does it begin in age? And then creating questionnaires that said, okay, what are your characteristics? They overate, they overslept, they craved sweets and starches. These were characteristics of the entity. So I think before we can start measuring something, physiologically, we actually need to characterize it. Now, the ancients had talked about cosmic consciousness and higher states of consciousness, but it had never been given actual substance and characterized. So with some colleagues, I created this questionnaire, the Consciousness Integration Questionnaire, which asked many questions and said, how frequently do you experience this, that, and the other? Administered it to over 600 TM meditators, and the results of that questionnaire are presented in the book for the first time. And what it did was it enabled us to see what are the characteristics, how do you measure it, and what predicts it. And not surprisingly, what predicts the growth of consciousness is the duration with which people have been meditating, the frequency of meditation, and what predicts the gifts of consciousness is the growth of consciousness. So it's exactly as we had assumed, that as consciousness grows, all these benefits accrue.
So there's this thing called consciousness that we can cultivate and grow. That in and of itself is, a revolutionary statement on the scientific side. I mean, the other guys, the shamans, the monks, these guys have been saying this for a very, very long time. And now on the scientific side, we're identifying this thing that we can cultivate and grow and we can use for the betterment of our lives, presumably. So, I mean, are people coming in saying, hey, I want to be happier, I want to be better in my career? Where does this consciousness now apply in kind of practical terms for people who want to learn? Because I think a lot of people don't even know what consciousness is and care to cultivate it because they don't see any of the tangible benefits. And so it's like what you guys are talking about, kind of, this esoteric stuff, and they're missing that consciousness is everything.
Well, yeah, it's interesting. My friend Bob Roth, to whom the book is dedicated, seasoned TM person and the head of the David Lynch Foundation, speaks about a very high-powered woman who came to him, and she's a sort of national figure, well-known, came to him and said, I want to sort of be able to access the vibrations of the universe, and I want to be able to sleep at night. So TM has this capacity to deal with ordinary distress like insomnia or a pain or a worry or a fretfulness or a feeling of lack of fulfillment. It can deal with distress. And in fact, I did write an earlier book called Transcendence, which really looked at transcendental meditation for what it can do for health. It's got great health benefits for people in distress in various circumstances, whether it's people with anxiety or post-traumatic stress, people with addictions, children in disadvantaged school districts, prisoners, people in bad states, and how it can really help them by de-stressing them and relieving stress. But then what emerged was that it can do so much more than that, that all of us can develop our potential. We don't have to be all of the above. We don't have to have all those problems that I just enumerated. We can just be folks going about our regular lives, but feeling like there's something more, that we want to somehow stretch our limits and experience life 200%. And that's where this new book comes into play, the supermind. We don't want an ordinary mind. We want a supermind. We want to be functioning at the limits of our capacity, and we want to be experiencing life in its full splendor and magnificence on a daily basis, even if it's getting up and having oatmeal in the morning, even if it's having this delightful conversation with a stranger. Each experience can be so rich and so fulfilling, and it's possible, and there's a methodology for how to get there. It's not just that I'm saying, there's Valhalla, now go for it, I'm saying, here is a method by which you can, in your own way, with your own supermind, get to where you want to go and get to the best that you can be.
I love that. When the Buddha was asked, hey, so you found enlightenment, is there a God? He said, listen, I'll show you how to observe your mind and you tell me. Right? Like get to work. And it really kind of took a lot of the pressure off, because it's like at the end of the day, it's for you to find. How much of this, because there's something on the other side of that, when you're talking about the splendor of life, there's this other paradigm that you're basically looking into that's the opposite of saying, hey doc, can you make my depression go away? Can you make my anxiety go away? Can you help me with my pain? And it's instead of this aversion of pain look at medicine and the way we can work with our patients, it's creating another channel to say, no, I want you to grow into this other place where chances are your depression and your anxiety and your sleeplessness and all these other things are going to just naturally get better. So to me, it's a very interesting paradigm shift, if you will, and it's a look at it. It's just a lens shift in a little bit, but then it creates an opportunity for the user to be empowered and gives them agency, which I think is incredibly empowering for a healthcare industry that's been challenged with saying, doc, throw a pill at me.
Well, I think the accomplishments of Western medicine are huge. The medicines that we all use, or many of us use and depend upon, wonderful things. I think where we may have made a mistake or may be making a mistake is by being over-dependent on them. For example, currently we're seeing this huge wave of opiate addiction. And, when somebody has an operation and they're in terrible pain, yes, by all means, they should have opiates to get over the pain. But then at a certain point, the opiates become a bigger problem than the pain. So at a certain point, one needs to say, okay, can you deal with a little bit of pain and let's pull these opiates away sooner rather than later? Maybe there are other things that you can do. Maybe you can do acupuncture, meditation itself. TM, I often find when maybe I have a headache or a sinus pain and I sit down to meditate, mysteriously it kind of gets better, or it seems less important. So I think that we need to work in tandem with the great accomplishments of Western medicine, not to be over-dependent on them and ignore all these other ways that we can enhance and boost our spirits and our lives.
Beautiful. I'd love to know what kind of research went into Supermind. What were the surprising things that you found when you started researching TM? Because I don't know many people who've actually studied it in this in depth.
Well, yeah, I think the questionnaire was really a huge effort, and I got 20% from South Africa, where my original TM teacher still teaches many years later, and she was instrumental in getting them for me. Local people, getting those people analyzing the questionnaire statistically, that could have been a doctorate right there. But it was a wonderful, a crucial part of the book. Talking to people. Fortunately, I was granted interviews by some really amazing people. One of them is the principal dancer in the New York City Ballet, Megan Fairchild. I just actually met her for the first time this morning. We had breakfast together here in Manhattan. And a luminous individual. What happened to Megan was that she began to develop fainting spells. Be the kiss of death to your career, because you've got to be poised, balanced, coordinated. And in troubleshooting how she might go about getting help for them, one of her ballet mistresses suggested TM. And essentially, it wiped out these fainting spells completely by settling her physiology, as it does. It makes our bodies more stable, calmer, it lowers our blood pressure, it makes us less reactive. By settling her physiology, the fainting spells went away completely and she continued to dance. But then she kept meditating, and here is the supermind growing. That was the relief of stress and the fixing of a symptom. But as the supermind continued to grow, someone who had previously been a complete perfectionist, never coloring outside the lines, literally. She says as a child, when she colored outside the lines, she would say, my life is ruined and I have to start over completely. She was such a perfectionist. But now she realized that sometimes there's a great benefit in taking risks, and even mistakes are opportunities. And so when a call went out for a Broadway actress who was able to dance in On the Town, a Broadway musical, she auditioned and was given the role in the room, and that basically changed her life and gave her a whole new set of acquaintances, friends, skills, experiences. She was telling me now she's going off to San Francisco to do this as a kind of musical. So it was an example to me of the kind of many people whom I met as part of the research in the book. There's the formal questionnaire part, but then there are all these people whom I interviewed almost like an anthropologist, putting these individuals together. Hugh Jackman, talking about his authenticity, which is his gift of the supermind. Jerry Seinfeld, talking about his increased energy, which has allowed him to remain a stand-up comic at age 60, when his friends and contemporaries have dropped by the wayside because it's so exhausting. A friend of mine, Ray Dalio, who's a legendary hedge fund owner and founder, who has been meditating for decades, saying it gives him the skills of a ninja, so that in the heat of a deal-making session, things come at him slowly, like as it does with a ninja, so that he can seize them in the moment. So research has been in multiple ways. It's been a questionnaire, it's been interviews, and the personal experiences that I've pooled together to create Supermind.
Amazing. Any misconceptions that you went in with and realized just, kind of blew some assumptions out of the water?
Yes, indeed. What I didn't realize was how soon the supermind can begin. And Maharishi actually anticipated that. He said the unfoldment of consciousness starts at the beginning. And indeed, we have David Lynch, the filmmaker, is another friend of mine who has a famous description in his book, Catching the Big Fish, when he talks about his very first TM session where he felt as though he was in an elevator where the cable had been cut and he fell into a pool of bliss. So that's very unusual so early. We have an emergency room doctor saying that in the first few days after she learned to meditate, she came to her emergency room and said, "Have you repainted the place?" They said, "No." She said, "Have you changed the lighting? It all looks brighter." No. Her perceptions had changed. Just in a few days after meditating, the world seemed brighter and more luminous. Another person within days of learning, this was a Vietnam vet, called his teacher within 3 days, and she says, what is it? He said, "I just wanted to report to you that I laughed." She said, "Yeah, but what's so special about that?" He said, "Well, I haven't laughed for 6 or 7 years." So early on in our daily consciousness, these little phenomena are occurring. And that was a revelation to me that it would happen so soon. And what I'm hoping to do with the book Supermind, I'm hoping to sensitize people to look for these changes early because they're there. But it's been compared to being in a dark room and the light gets turned on gradually. And at a certain point, you can see everything in the room. But if you know to look for it, you will see that little things are beginning to emerge piecemeal until the whole room becomes revealed to you.
That's beautiful. And this concept of the supermind and how these kind of super performers adapt to it is interesting. And the question is, your everyday person, like the Vietnam vet, your average person who's working in the ER room who goes in and has a perceptual shift, that's remarkable. Because it's happening pretty early in their development. Like, are there stages that you see as you go along with this?
Well, I think it's different for everybody. Some people it's very quick. Some people it's little by little. Someone once asked Maharishi, how does cosmic consciousness develop? Is it suddenly? Is it gradually? And he said, it's gradually, and then suddenly. So that's one way it can be. And in my book, I have compared it to the growth of a cactus flower. In my grandmother's backyard, there was this tall cactus, and it bloomed once a year. And you saw the bud kind of there, closed and waiting, as it were. And then one day, and it's at the top, the little boy, it looked like it was 10 feet tall of prickles. And one day, the gardener would come rushing in and say, quickly, come and look. And all of a sudden, the slow unfurling had suddenly bloomed, and there was this magnificent white flower at the top of the cactus. That's been one way in which this growth of consciousness can occur. But many times, there are little signs along the way, little things that accumulate. But if you don't know what they are, you won't see them. A story I have to tell you because it's so ordinary and so poignant. A resentful housewife just hates unloading the dishwasher. She just can't bring herself to do that. Probably it's the end of a day. She's done 100 other things. She's cooked the meal. She's fed the family. She's stacked the dishwasher. And now it's time to unload it. And this is just like the straw that breaks the camel's back. And so it's a problem. She won't unload the dishwasher. She meditates for just a few days. And then willy-nilly, without even intending, she's unloading the dishwasher and whistling while she puts the plates on the shelves. Something has shifted inside. And when you add all those things together, somebody compared it to a series of gray dots that are accumulating on a page, and at a certain threshold, those gray dots form an image, but you have to have enough of them before you see the image.
How long does it take to start painting them per day? If I recall, and I'm not a TM guy, but I'm a fan of TM. Was it 20 minutes twice a day? Is that
20 minutes twice a day?
Anyone can find 20 minutes twice a day. And typically it's
really, yes. I've asked the busiest people, businessmen on Wall Street, business women on Madison Avenue. One of the people in the book is a woman. I don't know if you know the series Mad Men. but she says, I'm Peggy on Mad Men. I'm the creative person in a man's world trying to get my ideas heard and dealing with all the stuff that's thrown at me. But with a TM, she has, absolutely turned her life around as I described in the book. But I say to her, I've asked the guys, now I'm going to ask you, where do you find the time? She said, initially I stole it from my sleep. I found the time here, I found it there. She said, but now I'm doing everything so much more efficiently that all of a sudden I have more time. I don't even know what to do with all the extra time I've got with everything going as smoothly as it is.
Amen. That's that other math, right? They say it's a Gandhi quote. Some say it's the famous quote, and I don't know who it's attributed to. And we can maybe look this up. Is today I have a particularly busy day, so I'm going to meditate for 2 hours instead of my customary one. And I've heard it attributed to a number of different people. So maybe
yes, I heard it to the Prime Minister Gladstone in relation to prayer. That on a regular day I have to pray 1 hour, but on a really busy day I have to pray 2 hours.
So now we know it's become like an urban legend kind of saying, but it really is. It really is that other math. It really, for people who are looking from the outside, they say that doesn't make any sense. But once you've perceived it, and once you've tasted consciousness, and the quality of time slows down, it really does create a drastic change in your perception of time and reality, and stress levels are just, they're just different. So in your book, you cite a couple studies that suggest 1/3 to half of our happiness is hereditary, but that leaves another half to 2/3 that are up to us. How much of this is nature versus nurture? How much can we actually get in and change our stars, if you will?
Well, I think 2/3 is quite a lot.
Yep.
And I do. You can see from childhood that some children are just blissful. They don't cry much. They settle down quickly if they're disturbed. They smile readily. They engage easily. And you can just see they have a blessed temperament. And other people are much more finicky, even as children, easily disgruntled, so on and so forth. But I think nurture can do a tremendous amount. One study that fascinates me, they were studying rhesus monkeys in Poolsville, Maryland, in a kind of naturalistic colony, and they found that about 15% of the infant monkeys seemed to be particularly nervous by predisposition. What they found is if they cross-fostered those nervous monkeys with what they called super moms, mother monkeys who were super attentive to their infants, those infants grew up to be the leaders of the colony. Somehow, their sensitivity that was part of their nervous predisposition, once exposed to this tremendous support and reinforcement, created this special blend of personality whereby somebody could be really empathic and at the same time very confident. And so I think nurture is huge.
That says a lot about our world and leadership and who gets to step in and what we need to do as parents. I love that. We've only got a couple minutes left, and I really want to talk about this concept of super performers, because I think there's this thing in our culture where, we talked about it in my first movie, the scale of vitality, where, in our healthcare system, oftentimes it's from like death to absence of symptoms is where the conversation is. But then the other half of that bar, which is moving up from absence of symptoms to vitality and prospering and splendor and all of these kinds of states of consciousness and awareness that you're referring to, that's where the super performers live. And I think that, without knowing that there's, a whole other world on the other half of that line, on the other side of that line, a lot of people just basically go from symptoms to absence of symptoms back to symptoms, and you see yo-yo weight gain. You see people just kind of treading water, if you will. And the concept of super performers offers us a whole other world to step into. And I'd love for you to kind of tease that out a little bit.
Well, if I may, that's so well put. I mean, really, you obviously get it. And may I get the name of your movie? I'd love to sort of see them.
Yeah, absolutely. First movie's called Vitality. And the second movie is called Origins.
And they're available through the usual channels?
They've been everywhere, yeah. But I'll have my team send you copies of it, yeah.
Oh, I'd really love that. I would actually really love that. I want to read a quote by William James. He's the father of psychology. And I never realized how brilliant it was until I'd looked at it a couple of times. But what he says is our normal waking consciousness is but one special type of consciousness, while all about it, parted from it by the filmiest of screens, there lie potential forms of consciousness entirely different. We may go through life without suspecting their existence, but apply the requisite stimulus, and at a touch they are there in all their completeness. Definite types of mentality, which probably somewhere have their field of application and adaptation. No account of the universe in its totality can be final, which leaves these other forms of consciousness quite disregarded. So there, from this classical psychologist, is the recognition that there are these other forms of consciousness. Apply the requisite stimulus. The one we've been talking about today is TM. And there at a touch, they're unfolded. It's like a secret trapdoor where you just push the right place. The trapdoor opens and a world becomes accessible. And that's the world you and I have been talking about. That's the world of splendor. That's the world of super performing. That's the world of living as richly as we possibly can. And it's really something we should all be entitled to. We should all aspire to, because we shouldn't just live to get along. We should live to surpass that, transcend that, and develop our supermind.
I love this. I love this. This is so fun for me. I love this conversation. So, as the Einstein and Bucky Fuller has a similar quote, is, you can't solve a problem from the same level of consciousness that, it came from, so you have to come up. And so this opportunity we find through TM, through meditation, to transcend and move to a higher level of consciousness then allows us to problem solve the little stuff, and also allows us to kind of step into a much greener pasture with wonderful things that are just right around the corner for every single one of us, and not just the professional ballerina. So here's the book. I actually have a trip planned, so this is my next read. I've already flipped through it, but I'm going to spend some time on it. It's called Supermind, Dr. Norman Rosenthal. He's already a New York Times best-selling author of a book called Transcendence. And Doc, I love this stuff. I'm so enthused about the work that you're doing, and I encourage everyone to really step into this kind of bigger paradigm, because it really is the promise for our species. And it's, we're in this place where we've been stuck in this eddy of just problem solving these things like anxiety and depression and all these kind of existential things. And we forgot about what the ancients have been talking about, which is this other realm that's available, and it's just a few breaths away.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for having me on your show, and I want to tell you it's been such a pleasure and honor to have a chance to talk with you, and I hope our paths may cross sometime again.
I'm sure they will. Thanks so much for being here.
Take care.
Hey, so I hope you enjoyed it. There's so much to be done in this field. So TM is great. TM is what he studied. There's multiple kinds of meditations, just like he said. There's multiple kinds of exercise. We need to start looking at this. We need to start looking at what consciousness is, and that's something that we can work on and bolster and support and feed, and that gives us so much. It's like the gift that keeps on giving. So let me know what you thought about this show. Check out the shows here over on my side that are already out. We have all kinds of really awesome guests that we've had on the show. Love to share them with you. Check out what they have to say and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you next time.